Hey everybody, Dave Diggle again. Welcome to day 2 of our confidence series. Thank you so much. Yesterday we got inundated with lovely messages on all the platforms for the information that we shared on performance yesterday, poor performance. And we've got a slurry of questions. So I'll answer some of those at the end of this one. So welcome back to day 2. I was actually just walking along the beach. It's actually quite nice. Then it started to bucket down with rain. So I've just darted under a tree. So hopefully it's not too wet. And maybe it is the Englishman in me. I do tend to attract the wet weather. So before we get into today's topic, I want to do a quick recap of what we covered yesterday on poor performance. And what we recognized was poor performance is very much linked to the quality of our preparation and how we learn. And when we learn certain things, it's all learned in here in our prefrontal cortex, and it gets delegated to our subconscious. And when it gets delegated is when it gets trusted. So it's a confidence issue with our processes, our skills, our performances that allows our brain to kick it back to, remember we talked about the boss in the office, and that's when we start to have doubts. When we have doubts, our performance becomes not the performance we want to do. And a lot of that comes from emotion and the expectation from what we want to perform on the day. Today's topic is probably even more frustrating than not being able to perform. Today's topic is about inconsistent performance. It's one thing to know that you're working towards being able to perform. It's an absolutely different thing when you know that you've done it once before or twice before, but it's really inconsistent. There's a lot of frustration and a lot of guilt and a lot of self-sabotage that comes with that inconsistent performance. Before we understand what inconsistent performance is, we need to understand exactly what consistent performance is and how we get consistent performance. So whenever we learn anything, remember we talked about the boss in the office, that part of our brain creates the pattern, the skill, the routine, the performance for us. Think of it like a set of dominoes. When you line those dominoes up, what you're looking to do is to create consistency and replicability. So you don't want to do a skill once one way and then skill a different way the next time. You're not likely to replicate a good performance if it's always different. So what we're looking for is a consistency in how we learn. That process of how do I do this skill or how do I do this routine, it needs to be very, very clear. Think of it, well, I'm of the generation where we used to have notebooks and we draw little pictures in the corner of the notebook, and it'll be like a sequence, it'll be a little flip book. And as you flip through that, it moves the little picture and it looks like it's animated. That's exactly how our brain works. Each time that we're learning something, what we're looking for is that flipbook process or the mental blueprint of how. So this is how we create a consistent performance. The better the blueprint, the more consistent the performance. But there's another aspect to that too. It's how we trigger that performance. So again, if we go back and use that same analogy of the dominoes, we've lined them all up, we've made the shape or the performance we're after, and then we tip the first domino and it knocks the second, which knocks the third, which knocks the fourth. That's how we create a performance. So we want to make sure that if we are creating a consistent performance, we trigger the performance the same way each and every time. So okay, so now we understand how we create a good, consistent performance. How do we end up with a really inconsistent performance? And what's that got to do with this series on challenges that athletes are facing? So again, let's think about those dominoes. But if we take away every second domino, so sometimes we do that for, it could be efficiency or time or effort. And an athlete might cut corners and go, yep, that's good enough, that's close enough. When we go to compete or we go to a trial or we want to do something that's being assessed or evaluated, something that's valuable to us, and we raise the significance of it, what our brain will do is it will look for flaws in it. it will look for those gaps. If there's gaps, exactly the same thing happens. It goes from our subconscious of trusted back to being not so trusted. And then we end up with this highly emotive performance. And often when we're performing in something that we value, our emotions are higher anyway. So every day you go to a competition, it doesn't matter how diligent you are, how good you are, there's still a part of you that goes, yeah, this is game day, this is competition. My emotions are higher. The necessity for it to be good is more. So therefore that emotional expectation rises, and we look for the quality of that blueprint. Really interesting thing to understand about the brain. When we get put under pressure, like competition, what it looks for is, where have I done this before? What's the way that I've performed this before? So if that performance has got those gaps, missing parts of the domino, then absolutely it's not going to tip consistently. It might tip really inconsistently. It might tip a couple of the dominoes and then miss one. So that's where we start to get our really inconsistent performances. So ultimately what we want to do in preparation is build a really good blueprint, understand our how. Then we want to make sure that when we replicate that, we're triggering it the same way each and every time. And when we trigger it, we want to recognize and reward. We want to add the positive emotion at the end of the process, not expect the emotion at the start going, am I good enough? Can I do this? Have I done enough? That negative emotion at the start will create doubts. So let's understand that a good performance, a good consistent replicable performance is very structured. It's very detailed. That blueprint inside our head, or that neurological point of reference, is very, very clear inside our head. We understand how we do it, we understand what the process is, and it's very, very detail orientated. When we have an inconsistent process, often there's bits missing to the process. We've cut corners, or we haven't recognized enough detail in how we've done what we've done. And the most significant part of this is recognizing that how. If you're inconsistent, there's two core reasons. It's a poor how and a higher emotion. Those two together end up creating a really inconsistent performance. So this comes on the back of what we discussed yesterday. You know, in order for us to get a good performance, make sure that we perform every single time, we've got to have a very, very clear blueprint inside our head. We've got to learn it, we've got to trust it, we've got to delegate it. Once we've gone through that process, it's all about trusting and hitting go. So inconsistency is a high emotion and an incomplete blueprint. We spoke yesterday a little bit about not necessarily doing overtraining, not doing too much, but again it comes back to the quality. If we're in good quality preparation, we can tick the boxes, we know exactly what we've done and how we've done what we've done, then consistency ends up being, I've just got hit by a piece of the tree, consistency ends up being the consequence of that, which is really good. So again, if you have any more questions, please put them in the comments down below. We share this on multiple different platforms. Yesterday we got some questions across a lot of different platforms. And I want to answer, we got a couple of questions yesterday around performance. It was off the back of what we'd done. One of the questions that came through was, there's an athlete that's training really, really well, very motivated, very diligent. However, come to competition day, are very flat. And we see this very frequently. The analogy I tend to use, I've done a lot of work in the motorsport industry, and it's like if I put a driver in an F1 vehicle and said, right, you're in the pit lane, what I want you to do is put your foot flat to the floor and just go out onto the track and just drive, don't take your foot off the floor. One of three things are going to happen. You're either going to crash, something's going to break on the vehicle, or they're going to run out of fuel. That same analogy happens in our athletes too. And to answer the question about being flat when you get to the competition, two reasons. One, they've probably been flat to the floor in preparation, doing more, doing everything, trying to tick every single box, making sure there's no stone left unturned. And what they've done is they've run out of fuel. The other aspect to this, and something that I teach a lot of my athletes, is, again, we're talking about fuel. Here in Australia, our fuel systems are, you've got 91, you've got 95, you've got 98 fuels. I think in the UK it's either E10, E5 and super unleaded. So they're your normal fuels. Your E10 or your 91 here in Australia, it's a cheap fuel. It's not for quality. And so you can go a long distance, but don't expect too much from it. Your 95 fuel is middle of the range. So you get a bit of better quality, and it's a little bit more expensive, but you can still go a fair distance. So what I call that's our training mindset. You want to have that controlled, fairly good quality, but you also got to get the distance out of it. The 98 is the best street version, or the super unleaded, the best street version. So this is what we call performer mode. And you want to spend a portion of your training in this performer mode. So it's a higher degree burning fuel. So that's a higher degree focus for us in what we're doing, a higher degree of quality. And that allows us to get comfortable and familiar with the performer mode. So when we go into competition, we know what it looks like, we know what it feels like. However, we're not spending our whole time trying to fuel it all the time at that 98. There's one more level to this, and that is high octane. So when we're talking about high performance, yes, we've got the 91, the 95, 98. And when we go in to do those ultimate performances, you want to go into that high octane, which is highly expensive, burns really, really well. So you wouldn't put it in your car to go shopping, but if there's something really, really important to you, you want to manage that fuel. So in answer to the question, how do we stop being flat when we get to competition? It's about managing our preparation, a better structure, a better focus in what kind of fuel am I using? Is it the 91 today for just general training? Is it 95? I'm working on some skills, but not necessarily looking for that high performance. Is it the 98 where I want to tap into that performance? This routine, this skill is where I need it to be. I want to get some repetition here. Or is it that high octane when it's game day and you go out there, the emotions are up and it's just 100% about quality? So I hope that answers that question in regards to being flat at competition. One more question I really did want to answer today. I was asked about when things change. So obviously we prepare for the optimal. We always prepare for the optimal. And when we've got that really good strategy of this is what I want to do, this is how I want to perform, sometimes things change. Sometimes there are things that need to change based on physicality. You might be nursing an injury, or they might need to change on the requirements of the competition or the event you're going into. You might need to change a routine or a skill. And there's other things that we have no control over. And if we give emotional, I talk about having an emotional currency, a focal currency. If we're spending our focal currency on things that we can't control, then essentially we're throwing our currency down the toilet. If we can't control it, there's no benefit in over-focusing on it. If we're over-focusing on that, then obviously the key thing that we do need to focus on, we're splitting our focus. We're spending our time on things that aren't giving us a return. So I understand the frustration of when things externally change. There might be a change in the categorization of the competition, which puts you at a disadvantage. That's not fair, but we can't control it. So what we need to do is recalibrate our objective. Every competition, every event needs to have a really clear objective. That adds value to our preparation process. And if that changes outside of our control, then we just need to learn to recalibrate and take a bit of a longer picture, or longer look at the bigger picture to understand that, okay, that's changed, hasn't changed a big end step that I'm looking to achieve, it's just changed one of the steps along the way. So I completely get the frustration that comes with that. However, you're not going to change it, so we have to adapt our focus. Hope you've got a lot out of today. Tomorrow's topic, 9:30 Sydney time, is we're going to look at people who get frequently injured, particularly around competition time. This happens so often, and more often than not, it's a psychological thing rather than a physiological thing. So, hope you enjoyed today. Thanks again for watching. Put those comments in the question box below, and I'll answer those tomorrow. Have a great day. It's now stopped raining, obviously, so now I can go back home. Speak to you tomorrow. Bye bye.